Ferocious. Enormous. Extinct. When you hear those three words, do not overthink it. What animal appears in your mind first? A dinosaur. Almost everyone sees the same thing. A tyrannosaur, a sauropod, something huge walking through smoke. But take the dinosaurs away for a second. A giant crocodile. Megalodon. Maybe a mammoth from the Ice Age. And that is the problem. When we talk about prehistoric giants, most people are trapped inside the same tiny circle of animals. But the fossil record is much bigger. Earth history is full of giants almost nobody talks about: river monsters, beach predators, plant eaters built like tanks, and marine mammals that make modern animals look small. Deep Time Tales is here for those forgotten giants. Not the animals that appear in every documentary. The powerful, strange creatures left in the shadows. The first one is so obscure that it does not even have a formal scientific name. For now, we can call it the Lesotho giant. If you have heard of it before, congratulations. Your paleontology trivia level is dangerously high. For almost everyone else, it sounds like nothing. In plain language, it was a gigantic amphibian-like predator, part of an ancient group called temnospondyles. And it was far larger than any amphibian alive today. Its lifestyle was probably closer to a crocodile than to a frog or salamander. It waded in water. It used its head and jaws as the weapon. And if something was small enough to fit into its mouth, it probably had a problem. For a long time, scientists thought brachiopoid temnospondyles were large, but not truly gigantic. Then a broken jaw fragment from southern Africa changed the scale. The fossil was incomplete, but the size of that fragment was absurd. When researchers compared it with the jaws of related animals, the estimate became hard to ignore. This creature may have reached around 7 meters in length. 7 meters. The largest living amphibian today, the Chinese giant salamander, reaches roughly 1.8 meters at most. Now imagine something with that same low, wet, heavy presence stretched to the length of a small bus. A 7-meter amphibian lying still in dark water. No roar. No chase music. Just eyes near the surface, a huge flat head, and a mouth that does not need to hurry. Sometimes the scariest thing in deep time is a giant amphibian waiting where the river turns black. And if the rivers were not enough, the Triassic seas had their own forgotten predators. The nothosaurs. Nothosaurs were Triassic marine reptiles, spread through ancient seas long before the classic marine reptiles of later ages became famous. At first glance, they can look a little like early cousins of plesiosaurs: long body, long neck, sharp teeth, a predator built for water. But compared with plesiosaurs, nothosaurs are almost invisible in the public imagination. For a long time, many people pictured them as medium-sized animals. Interesting, but not terrifying. The fossil record has been pushing back against that idea. In Triassic rocks from China and Europe, scientists have found material from much larger nothosaurs, including skull fragments and predatory teeth. Some of these animals may have reached 5 to 7 meters long. They were not just stretched out little reptiles. They were heavy-bodied predators, stronger and bulkier than the smaller nothosaurs people usually imagine. Here is the uncomfortable part. Unlike the later plesiosaurs, many nothosaurs were probably semi-aquatic. They could move through water. But they may also have rested along shorelines. So imagine walking along a Triassic beach. The water is warm. The sky is strange. There are no modern birds. No familiar mammals. Then, just ahead of you, something longer than a large crocodile is lying in the sun. Long neck. Flat skull. Needle teeth. Limbs built for both swimming and hauling itself out of the water. It is not a dinosaur. It is not a crocodile. And it is watching the shoreline like it owns it. Several of these giants come from the Triassic. That is not an accident. The Triassic is one of the most underrated monster ages in Earth's history. After the worst mass extinction the planet has ever seen, ecosystems were rebuilding. Old groups were fading. New groups were experimenting. And before dinosaurs truly took over the land, other animals had their chance to become enormous. One of the strangest was Lisowicia. Almost nobody outside paleontology talks about Lisowicia, partly because it was named only recently, in 2019. But its bones had already been coming out of the ground for years near a village in Poland. When scientists first saw some of those bones, the mistake was understandable. They looked dinosaur-sized. For a moment, it seemed natural to think they belonged to a large sauropodomorph dinosaur. But they did not. Lisowicia was a dicynodont. That means it belonged to the synapsid side of the tree, the broad evolutionary line that also includes mammals. It was not a dinosaur. It was one of those ancient mammal relatives that make prehistoric life stranger than our categories allow. And it was huge. Its hip height was over 2.5 meters. Its body length was more than 4.5 meters. Its body was deep, heavy, and massively built. Some estimates put it at several tons, possibly even approaching 9 tons. Picture a walking prehistoric tank. Not fast. Not elegant. Just a wall of muscle, bone, and mass moving through a Triassic landscape. At the time Lisowicia lived, dinosaurs had not yet fully become the giants of the land. So for a while, one of the largest animals on land was not a dinosaur at all. After the asteroid impact, mammals expanded into a world full of empty roles. But some of the weirdest mammal giants came from groups that most people cannot even name. One of those groups is the Brontotheres. Brontotheres looked like prehistoric rhinos at first glance: huge bodies, heavy legs, massive heads, sometimes strange paired horns or bony structures on the skull. But they were not rhinos. They were odd-toed ungulates, more closely connected to the evolutionary neighborhood of horses, rhinos, and tapirs. In other words, nature built a rhino-like tank more than once. One of the most famous Brontotheres was Megasaurops. Large individuals could stand around 2.5 meters at the shoulder, stretch over 4 meters long, and weigh several tons. In the Eocene world, an adult Megasaurops was not something most predators would want to test. Its body alone was a warning. Its skull made the warning visible. And it reminds us of something important. Giant does not always mean predator. Sometimes the most intimidating animal in the landscape is the herbivore that nothing can afford to attack. But if we turn back toward predators, mammals also produced monsters that feel almost impossible at first. The walrus. Most people have heard of walruses. But many people do not really feel their size. A large male walrus can be much heavier than a polar bear, and its tusks can grow over a meter long. But in prehistory, the walrus family had relatives that were stranger, larger, and more predatory. One of the most impressive was Pontolis. Pontolis lived along the Pacific coast of North America during the Miocene and Pliocene. It was a giant walrus, far larger than the animals most people imagine when they hear that word. Some reconstructions place it at more than 4 meters long. This was not a cute animal balancing a ball. This was a heavy marine carnivore in a world where the oceans were already dangerous. Megalodon was there. Large predatory whales were there. Other marine mammals were competing and hunting in a coastline ecosystem far rougher than most people picture. And Pontolis belonged in that world, not as a background creature, but as a giant. This is the point. Every one of us has a favorite prehistoric superstar: T-Rex, Megalodon, mammoths, giant crocodiles. There is nothing wrong with that. Those animals became famous for a reason. But they are not the whole story. Across hundreds of millions of years, Earth produced giants in almost every shape life could allow. Amphibians like river monsters. Marine reptiles that owned ancient beaches. Dicynodonts built like tanks before dinosaurs ruled. Mammals that became horned walls of muscle. Walrus relatives that turned coastlines into hunting grounds. They were forgotten. They were underestimated. Some were known from only pieces of bone. But for a time, each of them belonged to the world completely. They left marks in rock. They ruled their own corners of Earth. And they proved that deep time is bigger, stranger, and more crowded with giants than the few names we keep repeating. This is Deep Time Tales. And we are just getting started.